The arrow whistled past Magnolia's ear, embedding itself deep into the oak beam behind her as she dove behind the overturned wagon. Dust clouds swirled around the ransacked trading post, and somewhere in the chaos, she could hear Kestrel's war cry echoing across the valley. "Please," she screamed, her voice cracking as she pressed herself against the splintered wood. "Take them off. Take the chains off." But her words were lost in the thunder of hoof beats and the crack of rifle fire, the iron shackles around her. Wrists had rubbed her skin raw during the 3-day journey from Fort Meridian, and now, as the Apache warriors descended upon their captors, those same chains might be her death sentence. Kestrel Iron Feather stood 7 feet tall, his massive frame silhouetted against the burning sunset as he surveyed the battlefield. From atop his paint horse, his coal-black hair whipped in the desert wind, adorned with eagle feathers that marked his status as a war chief. The traders who had dared to cross his territory with stolen Apache women were learning the price of their greed. 3 months ago, Magnolia Wildrose had been the belle of Copper Creek, her auburn hair catching sunlight as she tended her father's general store, the daughter of a failed prospector turned merchant. She had dreams bigger than the dusty streets of their frontier town, but those dreams had turned to nightmares when the slave traders arrived, seeking exotic women to sell in the territories where Apache blood commanded high prices. Among certain collectors, now, as Kestrel's warriors systematically cut down the traders, she found herself caught between 2 worlds, neither fully belonging to the white settlement that had failed to protect her, nor to the Apache nation that saw her as stolen property. The giant Apache chief dismounted with fluid grace, his moccasins silent on the blood-soaked earth. In his massive hands, he carried 2 burlap sacks that the traders had been transporting. The other captives had already fled into the desert, but Magnolia remained frozen, watching as this mountain of a man approached the mysterious cargo that had been their traveling companions. "Take them off, please," she whispered again, this time looking directly at him as he drew near. Kestrel's obsidian eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Something flickered in his gaze, recognition, perhaps, or surprise. His weathered hands, stained with the blood of battle, paused over the rope ties of the first sack. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and smoke as he slowly opened the first bag. What tumbled out made his knees buckle, his war cry dying. In his throat, beaded moccasins, a silver hairbrush, a doeskin dress embroidered with morning glories, his wife's belongings. Itzalmoon Whisper had vanished 6 moons ago. During a raid on a supply caravan, the traders had claimed to know nothing. But here was the proof of their lies, packed away like trophies. Kestrel's hands trembled as he opened the second sack, and there, carefully preserved, was her beaded wedding necklace, the one he had placed around her neck during their bonding ceremony. Beneath the sacred cottonwood, Magnolia watched this giant warrior, this fearsome Apache chief, crumble as he held his wife's possessions. She understood then that they were both prisoners of the same cruel fate, both victims of men who traded in human suffering. "She's not dead," Magnolia said softly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Kestrel's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with desperate hope and barely contained fury. "What did you say?" Kestrel's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of mountains. Magnolia's heart hammered against her ribs as she met his gaze. The chains around her wrists suddenly felt lighter compared to the crushing weight of what she knew. "Your wife, Itzel. The traders, they spoke of her. She's alive." The Apache chief rose slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow across her trembling form. Around them, his warriors had finished their grim work, and an eerie silence had fallen over the trading post. Smoke curled lazily from the burning wagons, carrying the acrid scent of vengeance into the desert sky. "Speak," Kestrel commanded, his English heavily accented but clear. Years of trading with the white settlements had taught him their tongue, though he rarely used it. Magnolia swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. "They sold her to a man named Cornelius Ravencreston. Santa Fe, he collects women, Apache women especially. The traders bragged about the price they got." Kestrel's jaw clenched so tightly she could hear his teeth grinding. His hands, still clutching his wife's necklace, shook with barely controlled rage. You lie to save your skin. White woman, no. Magnolia struggled to her feet, the chains clanking against the wagon wheel. I heard them talking. They said she was too beautiful to kill, that Ravencrest paid triple their usual fee. They were planning to go back for more Apache women after. They sold us in Tucson. The war chief studied her face with the intensity of a hunting hawk. In her green eyes, he saw no deception, only the hollow ache of someone who had witnessed too much cruelty. She was young, perhaps 20 summers, with skin kissed golden by the sun and hair the color of autumn leaves. But it was the steel in her spine, the way she met his gaze without flinching, that gave him pause. Why tell me this? He asked. Magnolia lifted her chained hands. Because we're both prisoners. They took your wife. They took my freedom. Maybe we can help each other. One of Kestrel's warriors, a lean man with scars crisscrossing his chest, approached cautiously. Brother, he said in Apache, what do we do with the white captive? Her name is Magnolia. Kestrel replied in English, never taking his eyes off her face. And she stays with me. The warrior's eyebrows shot up. But Chief, she has information about Itzel. Kestrel's voice brooked no argument. He drew his knife, and Magnolia tensed, but instead of threatening her, he knelt and began working on her shackles. The metal was old and poorly made. Under his skilled hands, it gave way like morning mist. As the chains fell away, Magnolia rubbed her raw wrists, hardly daring to believe she was free. Thank you. Kestrel stood, towering over her. Once more, do not thank me yet. Magnolia Wildrose, this freedom comes with a price. She blinked in surprise. How do you know my full name? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Your father, Jonas Wildrose, traded fairly with my people. You have his eyes and his stubborn spirit. His expression darkened. You will guide me to Santa Fe. You will help me find my wife. In return, I will not leave you to die in this desert. The offer hung in the air between them like smoke from a sacred fire. Magnolia knew that agreeing meant abandoning any hope of returning to her old life in Copper Creek. But what life was there to return to? Her father was dead, killed by the same traitors who had taken her. The townspeople had done nothing to save her. And after we find her, she asked. Kestrel's obsidian eyes seemed to see straight through her soul. That will depend on whether you are brave enough to embrace a different path, Magnolia Wildrose, one that leads far from the world you knew. She thought of Itzel, a woman she had never met, but whose suffering called to her own. She thought of Kestrel, this fierce warrior chief who had shown her more mercy in 5 minutes than her own people had shown in 20 years. I'll help you, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was promising. As if summoned by her words, thunder rolled across the desert sky, and the first drops of rain began to fall, a rare blessing in this harsh land, washing away the blood and ash of the day's violence. The rain continued through the night, turning the desert floor into a canvas of mud and promise. Magnolia huddled close to the small fire Kestrel had built in a sheltered alcove of red rock, watching him through the dancing flames as he carefully cleaned his wife's belongings. Tell me about her, she said softly, her voice barely audible. Above the steady patter of rain, Kestrel's hands stilled on the silver hairbrush for a long moment. She thought he wouldn't answer. Then, as lightning illuminated the desert in stark white relief, he began to speak. Itzel was 16 summers when I first saw her. She was gathering wild honey near the sacred springs, singing to the bees so they would not sting her hands. His voice carried the weight of precious memory. Her voice could calm storms, gentle. Wild horses make even the angriest warrior lay down his weapons. Magnolia pulled her knees to her chest, entranced by the love that softened his granite features. How long were you married? 3 seasons. Not long enough. Thunder crashed overhead, and Kestrel's jaw tightened. She carried our first child. The traitors took that from me too. The words hit Magnolia like a physical blow. She had known these men were cruel, but the full scope of their evil was only now becoming clear. I'm so sorry. Kestrel set down the hairbrush and fixed her with his piercing gaze. Sorry will not bring her back. Only action will do that. He gestured toward the storm. The rain washes away our tracks. We leave at first light. Where exactly in Santa Fe? Magnolia asked. It's a big territory. You said this Ravencrest collects Apache women. Such a man would not hide his prizes. He would display them, show them off to other wealthy men. Kestrel's expression grew calculating. We find where the rich white men gather. We find him. Magnolia nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities. There's a grand hotel on the Plaza de Casa d'Oro. The territorial governor holds court there, along with all the mining barons and cattle kings. If Ravencrest wants to show off his collection, that's where he'd do it. You know this place. My father took me there once when I was younger, before the mining dried up and we moved to Copper Creek. She stared into the fire, remembering better days. It's like a palace inside, all marble and crystal and gold. Kestrel studied her profile in the firelight. This white woman continued to surprise him. She spoke like one who had seen both wealth and poverty, who understood the workings of power among her people. You will help me get inside. Magnolia met his gaze directly. I'll do whatever it takes to find Itzel. The sincerity in her voice stirred something unexpected in Kestrel's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire between them. He pushed the feeling aside. His heart belonged to Itzel, and his mission was clear. The journey will be dangerous, he warned. If we are caught, we won't be. Magnolia's voice carried a confidence that surprised them both. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. Kestrel raised an eyebrow. Speak. We pose as man and wife, a wealthy rancher and his exotic bride traveling to Santa Fe on business. She rushed on before he could object. You're tall enough and handsome enough to pass for white if we dress you properly. Your English is good, and She gestured to her unusual coloring, her auburn hair and green eyes. I could pass for mixed blood, half Apache, maybe Spanish. The kind of woman a successful man might take as a second wife. The suggestion hung between them like a challenge. Kestrel's first instinct was to reject the idea of pretending to be married to anyone but Itzel. Felt like sacrilege, but as he considered the plan, he had to admit its merit. The deception would require intimacy, sharing a room, acting as husband and wife in public. His voice was carefully neutral. Magnolia's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. I understand the requirements. I'm willing if you are. Another crash of thunder punctuated her words, and in the sudden flash of lightning, Kestrel saw something in her face that gave him pause, not just determination, but a kind of reckless courage that reminded him of his own warriors before battle. Very well, he said finally. But understand this, Magnolia Wildrose, this partnership ends when we find Itzel. Whatever feelings may arise between us, they cannot matter. My heart belongs to my wife. Of course, Magnolia replied, but even as she spoke the words, she wondered if either of them truly believed them. The fire crackled between them as the storm raged on. Two unlikely allies bound together by desperation, vengeance, and perhaps something deeper that neither was ready to acknowledge. Dawn broke clear and sharp, the desert air scrubbed clean by the night's storm. Magnolia woke to find Kestrel already moving about their camp with silent efficiency, preparing for the journey ahead. She watched him from beneath her lashes, noting how the morning light caught the bronze of his skin and the proud set of his shoulders. We need supplies, he said without preamble when he noticed she was awake, and proper clothing for our disguise. The nearest settlement was Broken Mesa, a rough mining town 2 days' ride south. Neither of them spoke much as they traveled, each lost in their own thoughts. Magnolia found herself studying her unlikely companion, the graceful way he moved, despite his size, the quiet confidence that radiated from him like heat from a stone warmed by the sun. By the time they reached Broken Mesa, she had committed every detail of his face to memory. The town was exactly what she had expected, a collection of ramshackle buildings clustered around a main street thick with dust and broken dreams. Saloons outnumbered shops 3 to 1, and the sound of raucous laughter spilled from behind batwing doors even in broad daylight. Stay close, Kestrel murmured as they dismounted in front of Morrison's General Store, and let me do the talking. The bell above the door jangled as they entered, drawing the attention of the proprietor, a thin, nervous man with wire spectacles perched on his nose. His eyes widened as he took in Kestrel's imposing figure. Good morning, Kestrel said smoothly. his accent barely noticeable. "My wife and I require traveling clothes. We're bound for Santa Fe on business." Magnolia marveled at the transformation. Gone was the fierce Apache warrior. In his place stood a well-spoken gentleman. Of obvious means, only she could see the predator lurking beneath the civilized veneer. "Of course, sir," Morrison stammered, clearly intimidated. "What exactly did you have in mind?" 2 hours later, they emerged from the store, dramatically changed. Kestrel now wore a fine black suit with a silver vest and polished boots. His hair, bound back with a leather tie, a wide-brimmed hat shadowed his features, making his heritage less obvious. Magnolia had chosen a traveling dress of deep blue silk with pearl buttons. Her hair swept up in an elaborate arrangement that emphasized her elegant neck. "You look," Kestrel began, then stopped, his jaw tightening. "Different," Magnolia suggested, smoothing her skirts. "Beautiful," the word escaped before he could stop it. Their eyes met and held for a heartbeat too long. Then Kestrel turned abruptly toward their horses. "We should move on. I want to reach the relay station before dark." The Broken Mesa Relay Station was a squat adobe building that served as both inn and trading post for travelers on the Santa Fe Trail. The proprietor, a heavy-set woman named Dolores, showed them to their room with barely concealed curiosity. "You folks newlyweds?" she asked, setting fresh towels on the washstand. "Recently married?" "Yes," Kestrel replied, his arm settling naturally round Magnolia's waist. "I'm Camden Ashford. This is my wife, Esperanza." The names rolled off his tongue with practiced ease, and Magnolia realized he had been planning this deception longer than she had known. His touch sent an unexpected warmth coursing through her, and she leaned into him, playing her part. "How romantic," Dolores beamed. "You make a handsome couple. Dinner's at 6 if you're interested." When the door closed behind her, Magnolia stepped away from Kestrel's embrace, suddenly aware of how small the room was and how it contained only one bed. "Camden Ashford?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. A slight smile tugged at his lips. "I heard the name in a newspaper once. A railroad baron from back east. And you make a convincing Esperanza. Where did you learn to act like that? You were completely different." Kestrel's expression grew serious. "Survival requires adaptation. I have watched your people for many years, learned their ways, their weaknesses. It was necessary. The reminder of the gulf between their worlds sobered them both." Magnolia turned toward the window, gazing out at the desert that stretched endlessly toward their destination. "Tell me about your life before," Kestrel said unexpectedly. "Before the traders." Magnolia was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, softly, "There's not much to tell. My mother died when I was 10. After that, it was just my father and me, moving from place to place as the mining opportunities dried up. He always said we'd strike it rich someday, settle down in a real house with china dishes and lace curtains. But you never did." "No, and now he's gone, and I'm—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "You are here," Kestrel said simply. "Alive, free. That is not nothing." She turned to face him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "Neither of us is truly free until we find it's all." Something shifted in his expression, gratitude, perhaps, or recognition. "You are not what I expected from a white woman." "What did you expect?" "Weakness, selfishness, the need to be protected." He moved closer, stopping just outside her personal space. "Instead, I find strength, courage, a warrior's heart in a lady's body." The compliment sent heat racing through her veins. "I'm not a warrior. Are you not?" His eyes searched her face. "You survived captivity. You chose to help a stranger find his wife rather than flee to safety. You are willing to risk everything for people you barely know." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "If that is not a warrior, I do not know what is." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Inside their small room, two people from different worlds stood on the precipice of something that could destroy them both, or save them. "We should go to dinner," Magnolia said finally, her voice unsteady. Double quotes, "Yes," Kestrel agreed, but neither of them moved toward the door. The dining room buzzed with conversation as travelers shared tales of the trail. over plates of beef stew and cornbread. Magnolia and Kestrel Camden and Esperanza to the world sat at a corner table, playing their roles perfectly. She laughed at his invented stories of cattle markets and railroad investments, while he attentively cut her meat and refilled her coffee cup. To any observer, they appeared to be what they claimed, a successful rancher and his devoted young wife, clearly besotted with each other, but beneath the performance, currents of real tension flowed between them. More coffee. Mr. Ashford, Dolores, appeared at their table, pot in hand. Thank you, yes. Kestrel's smile was practiced and charming. Excellent meal, as always. Oh, you've stayed here before. Magnolia felt her heart skip, but Kestrel didn't miss a beat. Many times, the Broken Mesa station has quite the reputation along the trail. After Dolores moved on, Magnolia leaned forward. Quick thinking, she murmured, years of practice. His dark eyes swept the room, cataloging faces and potential threats with the instincts of a born warrior. There's a man by the fireplace who keeps looking at us. Magnolia resisted the urge to turn. What kind of looking? Curious, maybe suspicious. Kestrel reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. To anyone watching, it looked like an intimate gesture between newlyweds. We may need to convince him we are what we claim. The simple touch sent electricity racing up her arm. How do we do that? Instead of answering, Kestrel rose and held out his hand. Dance with me, wife. In the corner, a traveling musician had begun playing a gentle waltz on his violin. Several couples had already taken to the small cleared area that served as a dance floor. Magnolia placed her hand in his, acutely aware of the strength in his fingers as he led her from the table. The moment his arm circled her waist, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. I don't know this dance, she whispered as he guided her into the steps. Follow my lead. His voice was warm against her ear. Trust me. And somehow, miraculously, she did, despite the deception, despite the danger, despite the fact that she barely knew this man. Magnolia found herself trusting Kestrel Iron Feather completely. They moved together as if they had been dancing for years, her body responding instinctively to his guidance. She was dimly aware of other couples around them, of the music and the watching eyes, but her world had narrowed to the solid warmth of his chest beneath her palm, and the way he looked at her as if she were something precious. The man by the fireplace, she managed to say. Is he still watching? Kestrel's eyes never left her face. I don't care. The admission hung between them, dangerous and thrilling. When the music ended, they remained in each other's arms a moment too long, breathing hard as if they had been running instead of dancing. We should retire, Kestrel said finally, his voice rougher than usual. The walk back to their room felt endless and too short at the same time. Once inside, the reality of their situation crashed over them both. One bed, one room, a charade that was becoming far too real. I'll sleep on the floor, Kestrel said quickly. Don't be ridiculous. The bed is big enough for both of us. Magnolia turned away, beginning to unpan her hair. We're adults. We can manage one night. But as she let her auburn locks fall free around her shoulders, she heard his sharp intake of breath and knew they were both in more trouble than they had bargained for. Magnolia. Her name was a prayer on his lips. She turned to find him watching her with an expression that made her knees weak. Gone was the controlled mask he had worn all day. In its place was raw longing, barely held in check. I know, she whispered. I feel it too. The admission broke something loose inside him. Into strides, he crossed the room and cupped her face in his hands. This is madness. I am married to another. My heart belongs. Your heart belongs to Itzel, she finished for him. I know. I'm not asking for your heart, Kestrel. I'm not asking for forever. Then what are you asking for? She rose on her tiptoes, bringing her lips within inches of his. Tonight. Just tonight. Before we reach Santa Fe and everything becomes complicated. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. His warrior's discipline warred with desires he had been denying since the moment he first saw her. Then, with a sound that was part growl, part surrender, he lowered his head and claimed her mouth. The kiss was nothing like the gentle romance she had imagined in her girlish dreams. It was fierce, desperate, full of all the longing and fear and need they had been carrying. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt as she pulled him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Are you certain?" he asked, his forehead pressed against hers. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." What happened next was inevitable, beautiful, and heartbreaking all at once. They came together with a passion born of shared danger and desperate need. Two souls finding solace in each other's arms even as they knew it couldn't last. Afterward, as Magnolia lay in the circle of his arms, she listened to his steady heartbeat and tried to memorize the feeling of being held by someone who made her feel completely safe for the first time in her life. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None," she lied, knowing that when this was over, regret might be all she had left. They reached Santa Fe as the sun painted the adobe buildings gold and crimson. The territorial capital sprawled across the high desert plateau, a mixture of Spanish colonial architecture and American frontier pragmatism. Church bells chimed the hour as their hired carriage rolled through the narrow streets toward the plaza. Neither had spoken much since leaving the relay station. The intimacy they had shared the night before hung between them like a beautiful, fragile thing that too many words might shatter. The Casa de Oro rose before them like a palace transported from another world. Its 3 stories of honey-colored stone were adorned with wrought iron balconies and arched windows that gleamed with real glass, a luxury in this harsh country. Liveried servants hurried forward to take their luggage as the carriage stopped beneath the hotel's grand portico. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford," Kestrel announced to the desk clerk, his performance flawless once again. "We have a reservation." The clerk, a thin man with an oiled mustache, consulted his ledger. "Ah yes, the suite on the 2nd floor. Welcome to Casa de Oro. I trust your journey was pleasant." "Most enlightening," Magnolia replied, her gloved hand resting on Kestrel's arm. "We're looking forward to sampling Santa Fe's unique offerings. Of course, madam, the hotel concierge can arrange tours of our finest attractions. We also host a grand ball tomorrow evening. All of the territory's most distinguished citizens will be in attendance." Magnolia and Kestrel exchanged glances. If Cornelius Ravencrest was indeed the social climber they suspected, he would certainly be at such an event. Their suite was everything she had remembered and more: silk wallpaper, crystal chandeliers, and furniture that had been shipped from New York at enormous expense. But Magnolia barely noticed the luxury. Her attention was focused entirely on the view from their balcony, which overlooked the bustling plaza below. "Perfect vantage point," Kestrel observed, joining her at the railing. To any observer, he was simply a loving husband showing his wife the sights. "We can watch the comings and goings, and tomorrow night we'll be among them." Magnolia turned to face him, suddenly aware that they were alone again for the first time since their night at the relay station. "Kestrel, about what happened, it cannot happen again," he said quietly, but without conviction. "I know. Itzel is my wife, my responsibility, my heart. I know," she repeated. Though the words cut like knives, that afternoon they began their reconnaissance, posing as a wealthy couple interested in local investments. They visited the finest shops, the most exclusive restaurants, anywhere the territorial elite might gather. Magnolia's natural charm and Kestrel's imposing presence opened doors that might have remained closed to others. It was at Madame Dubois' dress shop that they finally struck gold. "Oh, you simply must meet Cornelius Ravencrest," gushed the proprietress, a bird-like Frenchwoman with an eye for gossip and profit. Such a distinguished gentleman, and so cosmopolitan in his tastes. "Ravencrest?" Magnolia tilted her head with perfectly feigned interest. "The name sounds familiar." "He's quite the collector, you know. Art, antiquities, exotic treasures from across the frontier." Madame Dubois lowered her voice conspiratorially. "They say he has quite the private museum in his mansion. Very private. Very exclusive." Kestrel's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Magnolia's elbow, but his expression remained pleasantly neutral. "How fascinating. We'd love to meet him." "Well, you're in luck. He'll be at tomorrow's ball, of course. Such a prominent citizen couldn't possibly miss the governor's annual gala that evening." As they prepared for dinner in the hotel's grand restaurant, Magnolia found herself studying Kestrel's reflection in the mirror as she put on her earrings. He was adjusting his cufflinks with the same meticulous care he had once used to sharpen his arrows. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "I have been ready since the day they took her." His dark eyes met hers in the mirror. "But I am grateful I do not have to face it alone." The simple statement sent warmth flooding through her chest. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever the cost, she knew she would see this through to the end. "Kestrel," she said softly, "when this is over, when we've found it all, what happens to us?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. When he finally answered, his voice was carefully controlled. "You will be free to make your own choices, return to your people, start fresh somewhere new. Whatever you wish." He paused, then added quietly, "I will make sure you have the means to do so." It wasn't the answer her heart wanted to hear, but it was the one she had expected. Tomorrow they would walk into the lion's den to rescue the woman he loved, and if they survived, she would walk away from the only man who had ever made her feel truly alive. "Of course," she said, her voice steady despite the breaking in her chest. "That's very generous." In the mirror, she saw him flinch, but neither of them said anything more. The die was cast. Tomorrow, they would learn whether their desperate gamble would reunite Kestrel with his beloved wife or destroy them all. The governor's ball was everything Magnolia had expected and more. The Casa de Oro's grand ballroom sparkled with crystal and candlelight, filled with the cream of territorial society. Women in silk gowns glided across the marble floor like exotic birds, while men in expensive suits discussed politics and profit. With equal fervor, there, Kestrel murmured against her ear as they descended the sweeping staircase. By the champagne fountain, Cornelius Ravencrest was exactly what Magnolia had imagined: tall, distinguished, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that appraised everything and everyone around him like a buyer at auction. He held court near the refreshment table, surrounded by admirers and sycophants. "He's alone tonight," Magnolia observed. "No wife, no companion." Kestrel's jaw tightened. "His collection remains private," as the seamstress said. They made their way through the crowd, accepting introductions and making small talk while gradually working closer to their target. When they were finally close enough, Magnolia could see the calculating intelligence in Ravencrest's eyes, and something else that made her skin crawl. Mr. Ashford, the territorial governor, a portly man named Henderson, appeared at Kestrel's elbow. "I've been hoping to meet you. Word is you're interested in railroad investments." Among other things, Kestrel replied smoothly, "My wife and I are always looking for unique opportunities." Henderson's eyes lit up. "Then you absolutely must meet Cornelius Ravencrest. Cornelius, come meet the Ashfords." Ravencrest approached with a predator's grace, his gaze lingering appreciatively on Magnolia. "Charmed," he said, lifting her gloved hand to his lips. "Mrs. Ashford, you are absolutely exquisite." "You're too kind," Magnolia replied, forcing herself not to recoil from his touch. "I understand you're a collector," Kestrel interjected, his tone carefully casual. Ravencrest's eyes sharpened with interest. "Indeed, I specialize in rare and beautiful things, items of anthropological significance." His smile was cold as winter. "Perhaps you'd be interested in seeing my private collection? I so rarely find people with sophisticated enough tastes to appreciate such treasures." "We'd be honored," Magnolia said, her heart pounding. "Excellent. Shall we say tomorrow afternoon? My estate is just outside the city." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "I think you'll find my Apache pieces particularly fascinating." It took every ounce of self-control Kestrel possessed not to tear the man's throat out then and there. Instead, he smiled and nodded, playing his part perfectly. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and mounting tension. By the time they returned to their suite, both were wound tight as bowstrings. "Tomorrow," Kestrel said simply. "Tomorrow," Magnolia agreed. They stood facing each other in the lamplight, both knowing that the next day would likely bring either salvation or destruction. The careful distance they had maintained since their night at the relay station suddenly felt unbearable. Magnolia, K.